Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Greetings from wherever you're joining the webinar from. My name is Lina Digolo, and I am the Violence Against Women, Violence Against Children intersection program lead at the Prevention Collaborative. Today, I want to welcome everyone. I can see we are still having people joining us fast. So I'm just going to give it a few minutes. But I want to welcome you all to this exciting session. We have such a huge number of signups. I think we are very excited to see a lot of interest in this piece of work, because this is essentially what we want to really continue talking about today. So welcome to this session. And you can start feeling free to use the chat to introduce yourself as we give people just 1 minute to join in. I can see the numbers going up quite rapidly. Please use the chat box, tell us who you are, where you're from, and which organization you work in. So the webinar today that so this webinar today is really going to focus on launching evidence briefs that we are really excited to bring to you. We've been working on this for the last 2 years, and these briefs will really focus on how parenting programs can work to reduce family violence, particularly violence against women and violence against children. And so we'll be spending the next 1.5 hours really making a case, but also giving you a brief sneak peek on these briefs. We'll share a link with you where you can see the whole link, and also bringing to you some exciting discussions from partners who are already working at the intersection, parenting partners who are already working at the intersection of violence against women and violence against children. The briefs were developed in collaboration by 3 organizations who've been working very closely in advocating for this piece of work: UNICEF, Equimundo, and the Prevention Collaborative. And this is just a bit of just a 3-part, it's a 4-part series. And what we are presenting to you today is 3 briefs. Hold that space. You'll be seeing a 4th one coming soon. So keep you excited, start looking at those ones, and we'll be sharing the last part of the series with you shortly. Before we start the webinar, I just want to take us through some meeting etiquettes, because we really want this session to be engaging and collaborative, and having us continuing the discussions even as the session moves. We invite you to ask questions, to keep discussing, and you can do this in 2 ways. You can use the chat box, and this is open to you throughout the webinar. Please click on the button that's written panelist and audience, not panelists alone, so that everyone is able to see your comment or question, and even the responses can be viewed by everyone. We'll be recording this webinar, so it will be available for you immediately after the link. You can find it in any of the 3 organizations' sites: UNICEF, Equimundo, or Prevention Collaborative. And again, we encourage you to introduce yourself so that we know who's in the house. Use your chat box to write your name, country, and where you're joining the webinar from. So next slide, please. I want to take us over to the speakers, because we have quite a heavy session, but very exciting. And we've really we've divided this session into 2 parts. And the first part, we will be having 3 very key speakers who are experts in the area of child protection and violence against women and children intersection. We have Viktor Nylund, who's the director of UNICEF, in UNICEF Innocenti, Global Office of Research and Foresight. We also have Sheema Gupta, who's also a director in UNICEF, the Child Protection Program. And we will have Kate Doyle, who's a senior associate at the Prevention Collaborative, And the first three speakers will really set the stage for the conversation and make a case for why this piece of work that we're discussing today is important. We will also have Kate giving you a short and brief insight into the three briefs, but we'll also share the link so that you can actually see the full briefs as we go. So over to you, Bo, to start us off with the webinar.
Thank you, Lina, and thank you everyone for joining this launch of our series that is entitled Parenting Programming to Reduce Violence Against Children and Women. It's great to see that many have joined and there's such great interest in this series. This also because this series will help us to reshape the approach to violence prevention in families, because it dives into how parenting and caregiver programs can actually address violence against both children and women, including by tackling harmful gender norms. But before we begin, I would like to start by thanking all the teams who have worked on this series. It is a collaboration between UNICEF Innocenti and UNICEF's child protection team, as well as two organizations that have been dedicated to ending violence and promoting gender equality, namely the Prevention Collaborative and Equimundo. This series highlights the importance of evidence in shaping program design, direction, and of course, necessary adaptations to drive positive outcomes. And without evidence, of course, and without evidence-based design, you have no way actually of showing whether or not your efforts and investments have been effective and why they have been effective. This series also highlights the critical role of understanding staff attitudes and perceptions as a part of that evidence base through structured conversations or anonymous surveys together with staff of various organizations, including in governments, non-governmental and intergovernmental organizations. I've myself been involved throughout my career in important work related to child protection, where I've seen that with my team, the way that we did it both in Sri Lanka and the Sudan, to understand the perspectives and attitudes and practices of social workers as a core group of addressing child protection issues. It was very powerful, on the one hand, to design the program to understand what were their attitudes towards children. In the case of the Sudan, we were looking at what was called at the time abandoned babies, who were children born out of wedlock and were often left in the streets. And reviewing and understanding the attitude that social workers, both government as well as non-governmental organizations, would have against this group of children was very important in understanding how we could begin to tackle the issues that we were facing, because there were great numbers of deaths, and only by securing the stakeholders, the different social work groups, to take it on in a positive manner and to adapt their attitudes towards these children, we were able to make a great change in terms of how these programs were being successful. So this collaboration through this series and these briefs reflects our commitments to a unified approach to addressing violence. It shows the synergy between research and program implementation, where evidence-based insights from Innocenti can be used to inform and shape the strategies and initiatives led by program groups. Through this collaboration, we're not only identifying opportunities, but actively working towards innovation and practical adaptations to maximize programming potential. The partnership, I'm very pleased on the one hand, by joining efforts with the Prevention Collaborative and Equimundo and other coalitions such as the Global Parenting Initiative to support parents, we've amplified the technical knowledge and our impact to leverage diverse expertise to address the complexities of violence against children and women. And of course, by having partnerships, we also strengthen the take-up and the use of the products that we are putting before us today. As you will hear from my colleague Sheema, UNICEF's current child protection strategy also asks us to move beyond traditional approaches to violence prevention. And this strategy also highlights the importance of evidence-based programming to tackle the social and behavioral drivers of violence, addressing gender inequality and ensuring that we address the intersections between violence against children and violence against women. This work represents the combination of critical research, collaboration, and a shared commitment to creating change and improving the lives of children and women. And they should not be considered in isolation, but rather as a start of the transformative action signaled by UNICEF's Child Protection Strategy and also the UNICEF's Gender Action Plan. Once again, thank you all for having contributed to this effort. And to all of you attending today, huge thanks for your interest in these materials, and your commitment strengthens our collective impact. And I'm confident that today's launch is a catalyst for real change and uptake of these important materials. Without further ado, let me hand over to Sheema to share some of her insights with you as well. Over to you, Sheema.
Thank you, Viktor. Thank you so much for that introduction to the whole agenda for today. And that's really very interesting. I'm actually really very delighted to be here today, you know, to celebrate this special collaboration. As you just heard from Viktor, you know, it's between the UNICEF's Global Office of Research and Foresight, our child protection team and the program group, and also our partners, the Preventive Collaborative and Equimundo. So really coming together today is really quite a celebration, and a celebration of the success of what we are here today to share. So for all these reasons, and for all the reasons that Viktor outlined, it's so important, this collaboration, to the realization of our shared ambition, which is to see a world free from violence for girls, boys, and women. And given the numbers today who are on this webinar, I am actually convinced that we are all set in the right direction to actually move towards that world free from violence. I wanted to take a moment to reflect on why I think this work is so critical and so timely for UNICEF, for the child protection community, and beyond that. You know, if you look back and maybe this dates me, but I'm still going to say it, in the last 3 decades, we've made tremendous strides in our efforts to end violence against children and against women. We have the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. And these are the 2 most widely ratified international treaties, setting the standard for our global commitment to respect, protect, promote, and fulfill the rights of women and children. And yet, corporal punishment, along with other cruel or degrading disciplinary practices, continue to affect 70 to 80% of children worldwide, who typically first endure this form of violence before they reach the age of 5. And more than a quarter, 27% of women around the world aged 15 to 49 have experienced physical and/or sexual violence from a male intimate partner at least once in their lifetime. This is no coincidence. Evidence increasingly shows that violence against children and violence against women co-occur worldwide. About 1 in 4 children under 5 live with a mother who is a victim of such violence. And these forms of violence also share common risk factors, including, but not limited to, discriminatory gender norms and unequal power dynamics. I know many of you online right now are probably thinking of that person that you know, that case that you've worked at, that child that you've seen, and the home that you're familiar with in these circumstances. These harmful social determinants of violence go beyond the reach of protective legislation. They are entrenched in the fabric of societies, in the dynamics between people, of what we believe about ourselves and each other, and they reflect the way in which power is distributed, held and maintained. I think, and even yesterday I was recalling this, I was in Ghana some years ago, quite some years ago, and working on UNICEF's child protection program at that time. And we were doing a lot of work with the Domestic Violence Victim Support Unit, which were established in each of the police stations. And this was a very interesting team of, multi-sectoral. So you had psychologists, counselors, police, and so on, social workers. And the number of calls they got often were not so much for violence against the woman, but they would be called in by neighbors for violence against the child. And when they went in to respond to that, they would find that this is a home where there is violence against the woman, against the wife, against the mother. And there itself, then, so many years ago, we could see the linkages, but now we actually have this evidence. And it's for this reason that the Child Protection Strategy, launched by UNICEF in 2021, commits the organization to focus on universal prevention of violence, as well as our response to it. It's why we have committed ourselves to tackle the social and behavioral root causes of violence against children and against women. And it is why we are focused on programming at the intersections between violence against children and against women. Given this focus, it's an immense pleasure to be here today to talk about a programming approach that has the potential to deliver on all elements of our strategic vision, as well as equipping parents with increased skills to interact with and guide their children. Gender transformative parenting programs are focused on tackling the root causes of unequal power relations and rights violations that permit, condone, and reinforce violence. Taken alongside the tremendous efforts to strengthen services and develop legislation that I mentioned, these kinds of programs represent systemic models of violence prevention that hold huge promise for the future. Evidence from hundreds of randomized control trials around the world is conclusive. Well-designed parent and caregiver support interventions can reduce harsh parenting practices, create positive parent-child interactions, and mitigate parental stress. Even as I say this, I know there are many of you who actually have seen this in action in the work that each one of you does. UNICEF is proud to be delivering these programs with governments and partners in over 80 countries. As we will hear from some of the speakers today, these programs have also worked to reduce intimate partner violence, even when they did not set out to do so. And when they do so intentionally, the potential impact of these programs is significantly magnified. In view of a frightening lack of progress towards the achievement of Agenda 2030, programming approaches that can act as accelerators towards the achievement of multiple SDGs must not be underestimated. For the benefit of the many practitioners here, the very experienced practitioners who have joined today, I wanted to note that, in my opinion, the value of these briefs is in the field-focused design that they have, setting out for practitioners both why and how existing parenting programs can be adapted to amplify their impact on violence against children and against women. And so, we do hope that you will find them useful too. Let me end by expressing my sincere gratitude for joining us today to learn more about these important resources. I look forward to a rich discussion today, and I also look forward to months and years of seeing the impact of this. It starts off, but then as you go back to practice more or hone the practices that you already have, I am sure we will see the impact. Thank you. Kate.
Thank you so much, Viktor and Sheema, for setting the stage for us. And I'm really excited now to have the task of giving you a teaser and insight into what you can expect from these briefs. And as Sheema highlighted, and both Viktor as well, our three organizations, UNICEF, Prevention Collaborative, Equimundo, really came together because we do have this shared goal of reducing violence against children and violence against women. And we know that that requires, work at multiple levels with families and communities, services, and systems. But we really saw parenting programs as a key opportunity for us to do work to strengthen their existing impact. Because we know that in many communities, parents and caregivers are being reached by these programs, yet few of them intentionally seek to reduce both violence against children and violence against women. And yet at the same time, there's this growing evidence base that suggests that they can be strengthened to reduce both types of violence. And we also see that there's growing interest among many parenting practitioners of how to do so, but few resources available to support them in adapting their programs. So we sought to work together to develop these resources to really support practitioners to do the tangible work and take the steps to be able to adapt their programs to reduce both violence against children and violence against women. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to share a little bit about the series and detail a little bit what you can find in each of the briefs. But really, the briefs are designed to support parenting practitioners, as I mentioned, so to adopt a gender transformative approach to prevent violence against children and violence against women through parent and caregiver support programs. And the briefs are really meant to build upon each other, outlining why, what, and how to do this work. So the first brief is really an evidence summary of why is it important? What do we know about how these two types of violence intersect and what gender has to do with that? And the second brief then outlines what gender transformative parenting programs that reduce violence look like. And the third brief then provides tangible guidance. How do you adapt your program? You see that you would like to address both types of violence. So what are the steps you can take to adapt your existing program to integrate the evidence? And the fourth brief, which will be coming in a few months, is on how to measure the change that you see then. And before I jump into the briefs, I do want to note that when we're talking about parents, we're using the terms parents and caregivers interchangeably as individuals with a primary role in caring for children, whether they are biological children, adoptive children, whether the parents are foster parents, grandparents, other relatives, or guardians. So if I refer to parents throughout the presentation, know that I'm referring to both parents and caregivers. And before I jump into the first brief, I do want to give a shout out to my co-authors who are here with us today on the webinar. So Alessandra Guedes at UNICEF Innocenti, Christine Colby-Stewart at UNICEF, Clara Aleman at Equimundo, Lina Digolo, Lori Heisey, and Ruti Levtov at the Prevention Collaborative. Next slide, please. So brief number one, parenting programs to reduce violence against children and women, why it is important. So what you can find inside is really making the case why parenting programs should seek to reduce both violence against children and violence against women. And it's organized around three parts. So the evidence of why violence prevention matters for parenting programs, the evidence that we have that parenting programs can reduce violence in the home, and then thirdly, why parenting programs should promote gender equality. And in this first brief, as well as in all the subsequent briefs, it's also supported by recommended resources to help practitioners to further understand the intersections between violence against children and violence against women. So that might be guidance, research, or online courses that you can look to as resources in further understanding this evidence base. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through everything that is in the brief, but I do want to set a little bit of the stage of kind of why it's important and what you can expect within the first brief. And as Sheema and Viktor both highlighted, we know that many children grow up in homes characterized by violence against themselves, but also violence against their mothers or female caregivers. And in fact, the most common forms of violence against children and violence against women are violent discipline by parents and caregivers, and intimate partner violence against women. And these two types of violence often co-occur within families. And we know from the evidence that both types of violence have similar and compounding consequences for children and women's health and for child development. So for children, being exposed to either type of violence has similar negative impacts, for example, on their cognitive, social, emotional development, on their behavior and educational outcomes. It also even changes the developing brain of a child. So we know that these consequences are really critical to understand and to address. And we also know that when children, they're often exposed to multiple forms of violence, and then that can compound these consequences. Both types of violence also have intergenerational effects, so what we sometimes refer to as the intergenerational transmission of violence. So being exposed to violence in childhood increases the likelihood of future violence. So for example, boys who are exposed to violence during childhood are more likely to grow up and use intimate partner violence in adolescence or adulthood. And similarly, girls are more likely to grow up and experience intimate partner violence. And both are more likely to grow up and use violence against their own children one day. And as Sheema highlighted, both types of violence share common risk factors and social norms, and these are very much rooted in gender inequality. So risk factors include at the family level, marital conflict, alcohol abuse, men's dominance within the family. And at the societal level, this includes high levels of gender inequality, inadequate responses to violence. And similarly, the social norms, norms that support gender inequality, that tolerate violence, that promote masculinities based on violence and control. We know, for example, that parents who support gender inequality are more likely to use violence. And we also know that harmful gender norms around, what is expected behavior based on our sex or gender identity perpetuate violence, but they also fundamentally shape parenting practices. For example, how engaged fathers are in the care of their children, and also children's opportunities, whether girls go to school, the toys and opportunities that both boys and girls are given. Next slide, please. But there's this growing evidence base that parenting programs can reduce both violent discipline and intimate partner violence simultaneously. And as Sheema noted, sometimes these programs are not even intentionally doing so, but have actually had impacts on both types of violence, which suggests that there's opportunities for strengthening, right? And this evidence comes from both parenting programs, but also from violence prevention programs working with couples. And many of these programs are focused on working with parents of young children. And many effective programs are gender transformative, so they seek to address those harmful gender norms and unequal power dynamics. And I'm going to share a little bit more about that in a minute. We also know that while this evidence base is growing, it's limited. We need to have more programs that are being designed or adapted to intentionally seek to reduce both types of violence. And we need to evaluate them. And we need to evaluate them in multiple contexts and with different populations. And we also need more programs that are seeking to work and support families with diverse family structures and in different situations, including in humanitarian settings. But the existing evidence highlights that there are these entry points for strengthening parenting programs to reduce violence against children and women. And we feel that failing to do so is not just a missed opportunity, but may actually undermine the outcomes that parenting programs seek. For example, if we are preventing parents' use of violent discipline, but children are still being exposed to intimate partner violence within the home, we know that they still face the negative consequences of that exposure to violence. And similarly, if parents are having conflict in their relationships, it may make it harder for them to adopt the positive parenting practices that we're promoting, or to bond with their children or provide them adequate nurturing care. Next slide, please. And so, as I mentioned, the first brief points to the importance of addressing gender inequality and the evidence that gender transformative parenting programs can reduce both types of violence. And so brief 2 really then seeks to unpack what are gender transformative parenting programs that reduce violence? What do they look like? And what insights can that provide for strengthening existing parenting programs that maybe are not taking a gender transformative approach or are not seeking to address both violence against children and violence against women? And it's broken down into 4 parts. So what gender transformative parenting programs to reduce family violence are, their common program principles, their common delivery features and characteristics, as well as their common program content. And like in brief 1, it's supported with recommended resources that you can go to support the design of gender transformative programs, including resources to support the engagement of men as fathers and caregivers. Next slide, please. So I'll share, if you could just go back, thank you. So what do these programs look like? Gender transformative parenting programs seek to address the root causes of gender-based inequalities and challenge or transform the harmful gender roles, norms, and power imbalances that we know underpin violence. And they work with parents to promote caring, supportive, and nonviolent interactions for the whole family. So focusing not just on parent-child interactions, but focusing on the co-parent relationships as well. And they also often work to support more equitable relationships. So relationships where partners share responsibility for caregiving, for household tasks, and share in decision-making as well. And very often they also work to support parents and caregivers in being able to raise their children free from gender stereotypes, so that all children are raised with the same opportunities regardless of their sex or gender identity. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. Thank you. Gender transformative parenting programs share a number of common principles as well. So they're grounded in gender equality and women's rights. They also explicitly engage men as equitable parents and caregivers alongside women. So some programs work with men and women as couples, others engage just men and women as parents, separately. Some programs, in order to engage men, have an explicit focus on fathers and fatherhood. But this is something that very much characterizes gender transformative parenting programs. They also engage communities in program design or adaptation, making sure that they're tailored to the context. They reflect the needs and desires of parents in those communities. And they apply a strengths-based approach and meet parents where they are, seeking to help them build or strengthen the existing skills that they have as parents. And they promote women's and children's safety and rights. So working to reduce violence, we know that it's important that programs are prepared with how to respond and refer women and children experiencing violence to services when necessary, and also consider how to do so in the best interest of women and children. And finally, they also recognize that violence prevention requires work at all levels of the socio-ecological model, like I mentioned on the first slide. While not all programs will work at these different levels, they recognize this need, and often they might partner with organizations who are working at other levels. For example, organizations that might be promoting social norm change at the community level, or working to strengthen systems, for example, in the health system, or working with social workers. Next slide, please. And they also often share common content. So gender transformative parenting programs often include participatory activities that are designed to promote critical reflection on gender norms and power imbalances. They help support parents to consider how the expectations of what it is to be a man or to be a woman, or these expectations of how we should behave, influence life within their family and the opportunities for their children, and who takes on what roles within the family. They raise awareness of violence and its consequences, so both violence against women and violence against children. And they build couple relationship skills, whether that's couple communication or conflict resolution. They work to strengthen co-parent relationships. And they also strengthen caregiving and parenting skills, so supporting parents to adopt positive parenting practices, to use nonviolent discipline. And they build skills to manage emotions. So they help with stress management, emotional regulation. They support parents to adopt these behaviors themselves, but very often also support and promote that they build these skills in their children as well. And they promote more equitable family dynamics. So very often they will have a focus on content that promotes more equitable distribution of caregiving within the family. So engaging men in taking on household chores and taking on more of the caregiving responsibilities, and also promoting greater, more equitable decision-making within the home. And finally, they'll also promote positive gender socialization. So raising children free from gender stereotypes, thinking about the types of toys and games and opportunities that children are given from a young age. And all of these core features and commonalities, which are, unpacked much further within the brief, do provide some insights for how we might then strengthen existing parenting programs to reduce family violence. So to reduce both violence against women and violence against children. Next slide, please. And so that's where brief 3, parenting programs to reduce violence against children and women, how to adapt programs to address both types of violence, comes in. And this brief really is meant to be a very practical guide to support practitioners on how they can integrate IPV prevention and gender equality within existing parenting programs. So it's organized around 5 stages, and each of these stages has a number of key steps with checklists and are also accompanied by recommended don'ts, so things not to do when taking on adaptation. And the 5 stages are gaining organizational and stakeholder buy-in for adaptation, recognizing that we do need to start with ourselves, with our staff and facilitators of programs, and then consulting parents and understanding gender and violence in your context. So understanding what are the common social norms related to violence, understanding the desires and needs that parents in the community feel they have as parents, and then using that to adapt your program. So adapting the recruitment, the content and design of the program so that it can engage both male and female parents and caregivers, can promote reflection on harmful gender norms, and can build the skills that we know are important for addressing the risk factors and the drivers of violence. And then testing and refining your adapted program. So it's important to kind of pilot, to test these changes and understand if they're resonating in your community before rolling the program out. And then the last stage it highlights is training and adequately supporting facilitators to successfully implement, recognizing that really training and supportive supervision is incredibly important to successful and high quality implementation. And it includes, like the other briefs, recommended resources to support all stages of adaptation, whether that's resources on how to engage fathers, resources on the activities that you might use to promote reflection on gender norms, activities that you might use to promote skills building, as well as tools you might want to use in thinking about and understanding or verifying social norms in your context. Next slide, please. And so it's really designed to support existing parenting programs to adapt the content and the way they're delivered to support reducing violence against children and violence against women. But it can, potentially be applied to the design of new programs as well, but some additional steps might be needed. But we do want to emphasize that adaptation does require time and investment. But we do think that doing so can really unlock parents' potential to raise children in more equitable, loving, and nonviolent families. And so we really hope that people will take up this guidance and adapt it to their needs. Programs might have different starting points. Some programs might require only small changes, but others might require, really revisiting how they're currently doing things. For example, if you're only working with mothers, but not currently working with fathers and male caregivers, or if you have never had any program content on gender norms or gender roles within the family. But after adaptation, after doing those steps, after beginning to implement, monitoring and evaluation is really critical for understanding what's working and what's not working, and the impact on your intended outcomes. So have these adaptations actually helped to reduce violence against women, violence against children, or some of the risk factors that they share? And so brief 4, which is coming soon, is all about how to measure change, what you need to think about when monitoring and evaluating your adapted program. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to wrap up here, but before I do, I want to, in addition to all of the co-authors on these briefs, thank everyone who supported the briefs, all of the colleagues at Equimundo, Prevention Collaborative, and UNICEF who reviewed it, as well as ICS and other partners who provided their inputs into these briefs. And of course, our funders, Oak Foundation and Wellspring Philanthropic Fund, who made that possible. And really would like to thank all of you here joining today. It's exciting to see more than 700 people online interested in learning about and hopefully using these briefs. We really do hope that they will be a resource that might support more parenting practitioners to make steps to intentionally design our programs to reduce both violence against children and violence against women. And as Sheema noted in her opening remarks, I think that can really not only help to reduce violence, but amplify the other outcomes that parenting programs can have as well. So now I will hand it back to Lina, who will lead us into part 2 of the webinar.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you both Viktor and Sheema for setting for us the stage and reminding us why this matters, why we're doing this. And I agree with Kate, it's very exciting to see the interest numbers still going up. We have over 700 people. This just shows us that there's a need and there's interest in this work, and there's a community that can actually drive it forward. Kate, thank you for the insights that you've given us. That was just a very brief sneak peek into the briefs. We encourage you to use the link that's in the chat. Go in, download them. The briefs are now live. Please read them and share them wider so that now we have the tools to start getting some of this work out there. We want to now take it to the next stage where we have, again, another exciting set of speakers, people who've actually done this work and done it successfully. This is going to be a team that's going to be led by Clara Aleman, who's the Director of Programs at Equimundo. Clara will lead the discussion that will have 3 speakers: Beatrice Ogutu, who's the Executive Director from ICS-SP Africa, Godfrey Cyril, who's the Facilitate Lead at GPI and a Senior Lecturer at the Makerere University. And then we have Jamie Lackman, who's the Principal Investigator for the Global Parenting Initiative, GPI, and a Senior Researcher and Teaching Fellow at Oxford University. So we'll give the next session some time and now hear how this has been done in practice and that it is possible, and and learn more. Over to you, Clara.
Thank you so much, Lina. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with all of you and with over 700 people interested in learning more about this work. So in this stellar panel, we're going to hear from several experienced practitioners and researchers who are supporting the design, implementation, and the generation of evidence and learning on parenting programs across the globe. So welcome again, dear Beatrice, Godfrey, Jamie. I will ask you a few questions, and this hopefully will be a discussion with the time we have. So Beatrice, I'll start with you. And I'd love to ask you, at ICS, you recently embarked on adapting your parenting program, Skillful Parenting, to integrate intimate partner violence prevention and a gender transformative approach. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with this process and what motivated this effort, given that things had to be done very differently? And what did you see when you took this approach with families?
Thank you all for joining in and for the collective efforts in this work. Congratulations, first of all, to the team for launching these briefs. Indeed, they are going to benefit and advance the work in the VAC, VAWEN, the gender sectors globally. So congratulations. Thank you, Clara, for the question. Our Skillful Parenting program was designed over 10 years ago, particularly to address violence against children. But in the course of implementation and as we interacted with families and communities, the more it became clearer that there was need to address all aspects of family violence, and in particular violence against children and intimate partner violence, to achieve better outcomes for children and families The good news was that earlier on, we had done an evaluation of the program and it had shown tremendous effects on addressing issues of child maltreatment. But through other different evaluations as well, there was a bit of anecdotal evidence on the effects of the program with regards to improved communication, interactions and relationships within the spouses. It had also shown effects around improving sharing of roles within the family, but also shared decision making. So this was a good foundation for us to start from. And with this realization, the spoken needs of families, the emerging evidence at that particular time on the effects or the unique position of gender transformative parenting programs to address both violence against children and intimate partner violence, we were motivated enough to start the adaptation process to strengthen outcomes for both VAC and VAU within the family setting. So at that time, we had to start internally, first of all, and we really want to thank Prevention Collaborative for working this journey with us. It was an intense process that took close to 2 years for us to work together, change internal perceptions, attitudes, and norms around gender, and then be in a place where we can now adapt and enrich the program to strongly address both violence against children and intimate partner violence. So internally, a series of workshops and meetings with the Prevention Collaborative team really helped us to get a buy-in from the staff. Staff were allowed to safely reflect on their own gender norms and attitudes. They were also able to appreciate the rationale and the impact of gender transformative approaches. And it is at that time then we reviewed our theory of change for the program. And this was guided through structured reflections with the experts from PC, you being one of them in that particular process. So with the revised theory of change, we embarked on a process where in consultation with communities and families that we serve, including the facilitators of the program at community level, to integrate reflections around gender and power within our curriculum. So we added questions, participatory activities, case studies, and even a totally new topic within the curriculum to ensure that we would strengthen the outcomes on VAC and VAU. This program then was tested, this new adapted curriculum was tested, and the content has been refined on an ongoing basis across different caregiver groups. Now, with the confidence that now the adapted curriculum was delivering the impact, we've been able to train and certify different categories of facilitators to deliver the program across different settings in Kenya. We are also happy to report that this curriculum has been adopted by the government of Kenya as the national parenting program to be brought to scale across the country. And therefore, together with UNICEF and Prevention Collaborative, we continue to support the government to pre-test, pilot, and now scale the program across the country. But it was a 2-year intensive but structured process to adapt this program to strengthen these outcomes. Thank you, and back to you, Clara.
Thank you so much for sharing so much work and commitment in this nutshell. So intentionality, a long-term goal, and support, and starting by your team. That was super important. Godfrey, I would love to ask you now about your experience in Uganda. You have developed Parenting for Respectability with a program with an explicit focus on addressing both violence against children and violence against women. You have also worked actively to promote evidence-based parenting interventions at national level with several other parenting programs. So could you tell us about your experience in both developing Parenting for Respectability, but with all of the other programs, working in the uptake of gender transformative approaches? Which are some of the challenges that you may have faced?
Thank you, Clara, for giving me this opportunity to participate in this capacity. We developed the Parenting for Respectability about 12 years ago, starting in 2012. And at the time we're developing this program, few parenting programs were addressing the intersection between gender-based violence and violence against children. Also, few programs drew from existing parenting motivations within the family, particularly in the context of East Africa the concept of respectability was quite an important feature of family relationships, both between fathers and between mothers and between children. So we set out from the onset to develop an intervention that addressed both male and female caregivers in their own rights as caregivers. We knew that many parenting programs were being introduced as targeting caregivers whom most of the time would be perceived to be mothers. And so in the design of the Parenting for Respectability, we knew that we were targeting fathers in their own right. So the mobilization and recruitment was deliberate, and it promoted male engagement. One of the key features of the program was to recruit parental couples or those who are co-parenting if they were living in the same household. And this was particularly welcome because for the first time, fathers said they were seeing a program that was targeting them. And in fact, this program was happening at a time when HIV programming and other forms of programs were targeting women mainly, and that was understandable because of the context. And so fathers were feeling like they are being left out. And then they're targeted by a parenting program at the time of mobilization. Fathers were excited about it. And in fact, they liked the involvement in the program because many of them identified with the goals of the Parenting for Respectability. And beyond that, actually, fathers appreciated the fact that this program was contributing to what they loved most, to see good outcomes in their children. Now, an interesting outcome was around parental relationships, husband and wife or spousal couples. During the implementation of the program, lots of initial testimonies showed that parents found the program to be more beneficial to their relationships than even to their care relationships. And this acted as a motivation for participation. Most of the men and women would confess and say, my spouse has improved. My spouse is now, acting like the person that I wanted. But also a lot of parents would reflect and say, I now know that I was the problem in our marriage, and so I'm working hard to improve. So these were some of the motivations that encouraged, the delivery of the program and retention of fathers and mothers in the program. Now, to say some of the challenges, there are quite a number of challenges. First of all, retaining fathers remains a challenge because many men are still performing their traditional role of being the provider. Unfortunately, of course, this is now challenged by unemployment and so on. But nonetheless, fathers still, and don't stay home most of the time. So you need to find opportunities that, take care of this important role that fathers play if you want to encourage their participation. But a very important challenge was that men still faced a lot of social pressure from the community level to adhere to traditional norms, even when they themselves were on the journey of changing or transformation. For us, this suggested the importance of disseminating intervention values at community level. And I thank you very much, the previous speakers, for highlighting the need to go beyond family or to focus on community and other areas where social norms are important. One final challenge is monitoring negative intervention consequences resulting from men or women improving in their ability to take care of children. One of the experiences we saw is that men believed that they were more receptive to the intervention values and they learned more, and sometimes they started to criticize the approach of their wives or their spouses in parenting. And so this worried us that maybe we are likely to see an upsurge of negative consequences due to our intervention. And I think this is something that all parenting interventions that are doing gender transformation need to actually pay attention to.
Yeah, thank you so much for not only sharing your experience, but highlighting those challenges that you found and that we need to continue addressing. No? So I'd like to hear from both of you, Godfrey and Beatrice, how do you think that your experiences, what you described, but your journeys before, might have been different if these briefs that we're launching today, that Kate summarized, had been available when you adapted or developed your programs? Who would like to start?
Thank you.
Yeah, Beatrice.
Thank you, Clara. Thank you, Clara, for the question. First, I'd like to say there are several things that we have seen come out of the adaptation process. One is the openness to new insights and appreciation that there are culturally sensitive ways to transform norms that, you know, have hindered the aspirations of families, of children, of men and women in families. So that has generated a lot of demand. And that is quite important, especially to influence and inspire governments and bigger organizations to continue investing in these programs. Because again, the opportunity of gender transformative programs remain visible. There are multiple effects of this program, ranging from positive child development, reduction of violence within the family, improved parental health and well-being, including promotion of gender equality. So all this make it, you know, smart investments in an era where resource is very, very scarce. Now, to your question, if these briefs were there earlier on within the program, it would have saved us a lot of time, because knowing what it takes to adapt a program is important for planning. It saves time, because then you have clarity into how you're going to adapt. You have clarity into the structure that you're going to follow. Therefore, you're able to plan adequately. You given guidance in how to involve the different range of stakeholders that are critical in an adaptation process. But it also supports in enabling you to secure adequate resources for the process. It was a 2-year process for us. It took time, it took money. And if you're not having these insights before you start an adaptation process, you might miss finances in between, and therefore you might not go the long haul. So these briefs are quite critical in supporting organizations to plan accordingly, resource those processes accordingly, so that they can strengthen the outcomes of their program, test those programs, and scale them in partnership with others. These briefs, in addition to supporting us adapt gender transformative parenting programs, can also be used to help adapt other particular or similar programs across the continent that are geared towards strengthening families. So these are quite useful, and I'm sure the VAC, VAU, and gender sectors will immensely benefit from these guided processes that enable people to make their programs strong enough to work at the intersections to address both VAC and VAU. Thanks, and back to you, Clara.
Thank you so much. And over to you, Godfrey.
Thank you again. I think these guides, these briefs are really timely for us, because although we in the design of parenting for respectability, we had been deliberate from the onset to do gender transformation and include both spouses in the program. We still see new opportunities with the guidance that is being given here, exploring how to improve intervention effectiveness at addressing norms at the societal level. I think that's one thing. But I think beyond that, the success of the parenting for respectability has attracted a lot of attention and interest in the program. So it's being scaled up now. But in the process of scaling up, we are doing lots of adaptation, and other agencies are also doing their own adaptation. So we have come across organizations that want to drop what I could call the intervention core. For instance, they want to focus on early childhood alone, or caregiving skills alone without spousal relationships. So we've been struggling to promote this and to encourage them to know that there is a link and we need to address them. So now with this resource, I think it's a tool that we are going to to facilitate mindset change from those who are actually adapting the intervention. Because then we can say there is evidence here. It's not just us who are promoting this. It's a global community. It's UNICEF. It's the entire community in this area. So that's one. Secondly, the intervention, the work that we are doing right now involves building and developing a course for practitioners in Uganda on the design of evidence-based parenting interventions. And I think it's probably the first of its kind in Uganda and the region. And so I'm very glad that I'm actually leading this work now. And these resources, therefore, so timely because much of what is in here is consistent with the ideas around evidence-based interventions. So I'm very glad, and I would like to request right away that we be allowed to use these materials as a resource. And Jamie is here, he's going to be part of this initiative. So we're working with the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development to ensure that we standardize the practice of parenting work. And so the first target is to build capacity among practitioners.
That's fantastic, Beatrice and Godfrey, and you've been leading this work in your countries and helping governments to take up these approaches to scale. So listening to you and how you are recommending these resources for saving time, for increasing effectiveness of intervention, setting standards of how to do this, planning and supporting really the effectiveness and amplifying the outcomes that these parenting programs can achieve is extremely reassuring. And yeah, I know you'll continue to work on this. I would like to now ask you, Jamie, over to you, who, as Lina mentioned, you are CEO of Parenting for Lifelong Health and principal investigator of Global Parenting Initiative. So you're working with practitioners in different countries, continents, in all settings, and providing parenting resources and support in both in-person and remote modalities. So could you tell us what is Parenting for Lifelong Health currently thinking about how to prevent violence against children and women within the parenting programs it's supporting? And how do you see these briefs playing a role in supporting these parenting programs and the practitioners that are designing, adapting, implementing them to take on gender transformative approaches to violence prevention? And a tiny follow-up is, after thinking about the role, is how can we best support practitioners that are interested, like all of those, many of those listening today, interested to strengthen their programs in this sense, to really use these briefs, to apply them, to acquire the experience with implementing effective approaches to engage fathers, as Godfrey was talking about, promote equitable, caring, and non-violent couple and family violence relationships. So 3 questions in one. Over to you, Jamie.
Thanks so much, Clara. And first of all, I would like to thank UNICEF and the Prevention Collaborative and Equimundo for really leading the development of these briefs, and for Godfrey and Beatrice for demonstrating how the key approaches can be applied in the field within their own organizations and stakeholders. I mean, you really raised the bar by providing a blueprint on how parenting programs can have a positive impact on family well-being and address those underlying causes of violence against women and children. And this is really, as Kate said in the beginning, this is an opportunity that we just cannot afford to miss, especially given their urgent need to address the co-occurrence of violence against women and children and its short and long-term impacts, especially in contexts where there are limited resources and capacity. So I feel like I'm really on the shoulders of giants here, coming after Beatrice and Godfrey. But I'd like to offer 3 main areas where we can build on these briefs to have a lasting and meaningful impact at scale. And those are evidence generation, capacity building, and innovation. So first, we really need to continue building the evidence of effectiveness of gender transformative parenting programs on how they prevent violence against women and children. The past 5 to 10 years, we've seen such a remarkable increase in the number of randomized control trials and other rigorous evaluations, including the research that Godfrey and Kate and yourself and others have been conducting. And we need to build on this research to understand the mechanisms of change, especially how those key components of improving equitable inequitable gender norms and addressing power dynamics, how do they lead to reduced violence against women and children? And how do we understand whether the current interventions are working differently for different types of people through moderation analyses? The growing number of trials and other rigorous evaluations will also allow us to conduct systematic reviews and meta-analyses to understand how these interventions are working across many different contexts. Another additional evidence gap is understanding that an additive benefit for using gender transformative approaches in comparison to more traditional parenting programs. I don't think there have been, correct me if they're wrong, but I don't know whether I don't think there have been any rigorous evaluations that compare programs with gender transformative content with those that don't include this approach. And that's really important to understand the additive benefit and doing the cost analyses alongside that. And I think it's really important, and looking forward toward the release of the fourth brief, that we use reliable, open access, and freely available measures that capture the core behaviors, attitudes, and norm outcomes that we want to change and to achieve. Second, we need to build on this incredible work that the Prevention Collaborative and Equimundo have been supporting with local community-led organizations and practitioners to embed gender transformative approaches within existing systems of support. The examples that we've heard from Makerere University and in investing in our children and societies, they show that by working together, we can find effective solutions that are culturally sensitive to the context in which parents and practitioners live. And it will be critical to ensure that these common elements that we've seen in the second brief are delivered with fidelity, and as Godfrey said, in a way that also does no harm. And this is particularly important in more conservative contexts where inequitable gender norms are more entrenched. The third brief provides a really helpful foundation on how this can be done in a systematic way, moving carefully and slowly together. However, organizations and practitioners on the local level will need that financial and technical support to operationalize this change that's outlined in the brief. And we can all do our part to advocate for these resources globally, but we also need to allow the local stakeholders and policymakers to take the lead. And third and lastly, the field needs further innovation in order to be able to achieve meaningful and sustainable impact at scale on reducing violence against women and children through parenting solutions that challenge both unequal gender norms and power dynamics while building positive and nurturing parenting and partner relationships. Our current approach, relying primarily on in-person programs, is just too resource intensive to achieve the scale needed to address the immense problem of violence against women and children that we heard at the beginning of the webinar. So we're really at the Global Parenting Initiative and at Parenting for Lifelong Health, trying to build that evidence of effectiveness of digital and hybrid solutions that are embedded in existing services to start addressing these barriers to scale. But it's important to also recognize that they have their limitations in terms of their evidence of effectiveness. And while we have some evidence of increased male engagement in digital and hybrid approaches, we really don't know whether those lighter touch digital interventions are sufficient to address more deeply rooted inequitable gender norms, attitudes, and behaviors. And it really may be that a hybrid approach is necessary to allow for direct engagement with parents in specific components, such as reflecting on gender norms and power imbalances. And really, it comes down to us as researchers, innovators, practitioners, policymakers, and funders to work together to address these challenges so that we are truly able to achieve transformation at scale. And so as a core member of Global Initiative to Support Parents, Parenting for Lifelong Health and the Global Parenting Initiative is committed to working and walking alongside UNICEF, Equimundo, Prevention Collaborative, Makerere University, Investing in Children in Our Societies, and others to really support that adoption and integration of approaches and strategies that are offered by these amazing briefs, and to learn together on how to improve their effectiveness and scalability. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I have no more time, but I just want to say it's so encouraging to hear Godfrey, Jamie, Beatrice, all of you, and this reflects how the field of parenting caregiver support is really moving forward, and we are in this together, learning and continuing to building the evidence, learning with partners and strengthening and equipping ourselves and partners with the capacity to really implement these approaches and innovate to reach parents and caregivers through different modalities wherever they are, not only through in-person interventions. So thank you again so much, the three of you, for sharing your experience, your enthusiasm, your commitment to leverage the potential of parenting programs that are already working with families, women, men, caregivers, to not only strengthening parenting skills, but really foster these caring, balanced family dynamics and prevent the intergenerational transmission of violence we were speaking at the beginning. So thank you again so much. We will continue collaborating and working together. And now I will hand it over again to Lina.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clara, Jamie, Godfrey, Beatrice, for that very interesting session and just really making it clear that this is possible and it can be done in practice. It's very encouraging to hear from Uganda and Kenya doing it at scale and already entrenching it into the government systems. I've seen on chat, there are countries that are still wanting to learn from you. Zimbabwe is already thinking about this. So there would be some cross-learning across the region and I think even beyond, and just hoping that this is going to be a forum that encourages this networking so that we don't have to start from scratch. We now know that we have the tools. You've heard from the speakers, they think this would have been quite easier if they had tools up front, and now you have them. So click that link. Click the link and start using the documents. I want to bring all the speakers back to plenary. We got very many questions for you. Some have been answered in the chat. Some we will continue to answer, but due to time, we will just highlight a few. Please feel free to also go off your mic and just put up your hand, and when we have time, we'll be able to take a few questions. But I want to start us off with some that were already asked. The first question, or the first two questions, will go to you, Kate, and it was regarding the briefs. And someone sorry, 1 minute, the questions. So Kate, the first question is that, and it comes from Stephanie, saying that I have found that mothers-only parenting programs actually provides a safe space in which violence against women and women can openly be shared and discussed, whereas mixed programs inhibit the women. And Caroline also giving, I think, an addition to that, saying, I'm interested in learning about power dynamics and how they're addressed in parenting programs. So I think those two are really just asking you about what your thoughts are around this. Did you find any evidence around this? Kate, you can take that. And I'll have one question for Beatrice and Godfrey, and then we can come to the others. So Beatrice and Godfrey, someone is interested, Stephanie again is interested in the programs that you're running. Do they include realistic depictions of the positive parenting attitudes and practices in action? And she puts that in quotes, role modeling. And if yes, what formats do these take? Kate, I hope you got the question, and Beatrice and Godfrey, maybe we can start with those and come back to others.
Sure, thanks, Lina. And I think I saw some other questions as well asking about sort of the evidence around how these programs are working with men and women. And, you know, very much we built upon a systematic review that was looking at programs that have reduced violence against women and violence against children. And many of those do engage both men and women. But I think it's important to understand that that's always tailored to the context. So we do in the briefs outline the importance of doing formative research with parents, and particularly with women, around, you know, what are their expectations or desires around a parenting program that might engage both men and women. You know, are there any risks or concerns, for example, that women might have around participating in a program with their partner? And so programs do engage men and women in different ways. It might be that they have a common curriculum that is delivered separately to men and separately to women. They might be engaged together in sessions. They might be engaged separately, but sometimes come together. So really the important thing is to do formative research with parents, to hear from them, what is it that they would feel comfortable doing? What are the risks or concerns that they see? And then really tailoring the content and the delivery of the program to those risks and concerns and opportunities in your context. So really, I think it's not a blanket approach that will work everywhere, but it really does have to be informed by the context and by what particularly women are saying they would feel comfortable with, and thinking about what the potential risks are.
Thanks, Kate. Godfrey, Beatrice, any of you can take the other question. Did you get it?
Yes, thank you, Lina, and thank you for the question. Indeed, employing bottom-up approaches are quite critical in developing the program and the topics and the participatory reflection exercises that are within the curriculums that we are currently implementing. This remains quite important across all processes, including the original program that we developed over 10 years ago, and the adaptation processes that were also very consultative with the parents, the caregivers themselves, and also appreciating that the fact that caregiver groups come in different diversities. So for example, there are a lot of consultations that went into, parents and caregivers who are taking care of young children, those who are taking care of teenagers, adolescents with parenting responsibilities, grandparents who are taking care of their children. So all these caregiver groups were mapped out, consultations were done to be able to think together with them what a parenting program that addresses their aspirations and needs would look like. And once that happens, then the ownership and the cultural feasibility of the program then becomes something that makes you successful in the long run. So then I agree with the person who asked the question that it is quite important then to involve all caregiver groups from the onset as we design or adapt these programs to strengthen the outcomes that we have been talking about. Without that, then the program becomes not fully owned. It might not address the needs and aspirations of parents, and you might miss out on key input that then would enable you to successfully implement the program through your community level workforce. Again, equally, the way you approach male caregivers and women caregivers in getting their opinions in terms of how and what they want included in their curriculum, those methodologies have to vary across board. Particularly the gender transformative parenting program that we're delivering now is delivered through parent peer groups. It allows for participatory reflection exercises. So there are a lot of role plays. There are a lot of case studies that parents review together. There is a lot of questioning and group work where we're building around the strengths of parents and them sharing the experiences that have worked for them within those particular communities. So it has to be very consultative, and the methods to reflect on these issues must be very experiential and participatory for you to be able to achieve the outcomes that you're looking forward to. Thanks, and back to Godfrey.
Thank you, Beatrice. I think I just have to agree with you and just add maybe a thing or so. It's really important that we think about how the program is delivered and how it is structured. I mean, just like Kate also said, that it has to be dependent on the different types of groups and communities that you're working with. And I think what we did in our case, we asked the parents, the community, how do they want the groups to be structured? And they came up with recommendations, which took us back to the drawing board and challenged our initial assumptions. So all these are important. But peer-led facilitation is quite important because we really don't use the concept of role model parents, because sometimes this can be questionable at times. And so what we do is to encourage facilitators to come from within, but this could be facilitators of some profession, maybe teachers or just lay facilitators who are respected in some ways. And what we saw is that if you deliver the program to to a group of parents and you provided additional home practice activities, then that provided an opportunity for male and female caregivers to interact at the family level, to try out things and to justify a change in behavior, because then they have something to talk about together. So there's a real change when you have creative and interesting ways to deliver the program.
Great, and it's very interesting to see the similarities between what Godfrey is saying and Beatrice, despite the fact that they're working in different contexts, but well, not so different, but it just shows how some of these pieces of work and these pieces of these products are producing can be used across the different contexts with good adaptation. I have another question for you, Godfrey and Beatrice. One of you can take it, or both. Someone is curious about how best to strike the balance between incorporating gender transformative approaches while addressing the practical challenges of already a content overload, the content overload that you have in your regular parenting programs. And then Clara, there's a question for you. Someone wants to know whether there are global findings on effective ways to include fathers. I think this is based on your experience with the male engagement program. Male participation in parenting program is not easy. How have you done this? There's been a lot of questions around how this briefscape will sort of, how do they address the different populations? The single mothers, parents, or children with disability, adolescent parents, extended families. This question can be answered by Kate or anyone else who's programming around this. Have you managed to do this piece of work and reaching the different audiences? Okay, over to you. We can start with Godfrey.
Yes, indeed, there's always a challenge trying to balance the overload, and I think that's very common for all programs, including those that are trying to do gender transformative parenting. But I think the main issue here is, what is the risk factor that you are trying to address, and how have you articulated it? So it goes back to the identification of the problem itself, and for us, that's critical. And again, returning to the core principle of today's briefs, which is the link or the interconnection between violence against children and violence against women. So as you are writing the curriculum, you must ensure that the factors that are important are all addressed, such that your content will be balanced at that level. Of course, we have known that some programs can be too long because we are overly eager to address so many risk factors, but we have to try and balance and maybe draw from the current principles around intervention development. Too many sessions or too much content is unproductive, and too few will also not transform the norms that we are trying to address.
Thank you, Godfrey. Beatrice, anything to add?
Thank you. Just to add on to what Godfrey had mentioned, indeed, sometimes the balance is quite challenging. It speaks to what are your core modules for the outcomes that you want to achieve for your particular program. And I know most local programs have been struggling to find out what is their core content. If you have 14 topics, 12 topics, which are the bare minimums that you can be able to do. And therefore, this is defined with your theory of change and how you categorize your primary and secondary outcomes, but also within our own adaptation experience here in Kenya and Tanzania as well. We had to look for opportunities to infuse or integrate the gender reflections in existing modules. And that was a plus for us. We only ended up adding one extra module to make them to a total of 12. So you have to find opportunities within core topics within any parenting curriculum to infuse those participatory activities, case studies, group discussions to challenge the norms that are available within our community. So it's a delicate balance, but it's an internal discussion that, again, the adaptation guides can be able to help to find that balance. You need to know what your core modules are for the outcomes that you want to achieve. And this ongoing feedback mechanism with your caregiver groups is also quite important all the time. We appreciate the diversity of caregiver groups. So that ongoing consultation then help you constantly refine the content to fit that particular caregiver group that you're working together with. Thanks, and back to you, Lina.
Thanks, Beatrice. So the idea here is to make sure that we are really infusing it across modules and not necessarily thinking about adding additional modules. Jamie, I think you want to chime in? Or is it a different?
Just to emphasize that it's just these briefs really nicely lay out that it's not just adding components to your intervention. It's more really thinking about how the intervention is being delivered, in what are the discussions happening within, are we inquiring around and investigating around gender attitudes within each session, and even beyond that, how the interventions are delivered in a community. So, you know, you could have a really wonderful content, but if it's not being delivered to where men and women are and at their level, then you can forget about its impact. So I think, Beatrice, you're really nailing it on the head when it comes to the need to really integrate within the interventions rather than just tacking on another 5 or 6 or 7 sessions that are gender transformative in a way that might even be less effective.
Absolutely. I mean, that's well said. Clara, we have a few minutes. We can have Clara and then anyone else in the panel who wanted to touch on the population question. Go ahead.
Yes. And I'm making sure I also paste a useful resource as we don't have a lot of time. So yeah, definitely, as Godfrey was mentioning, and also Beatrice touched on this, recruiting, engaging men, fathers, caregivers meaningfully is a challenge. And this does require not just, as we say, invite men and mix, meaning it's because we know that parenting programs and norms in communities usually are discouraging men to do the types of nurturing caregiving we would hope or we want them to encourage them to do. So really understanding the context, what men's concerns are around fatherhood, what their pain points, what types of relationships they want with their children, what are their aspirations for their children and their family is a super important starting point. And Beatrice and Jamie touched on this, on the importance of understanding the context and how these recommendations need to be culturally adapted, and understanding the specific barriers that fathers are facing to participate in interventions. And also this means designing programs that meet fathers where they are. And this is both metaphorically, but also in terms of both what they want to learn, what their concerns and challenges are regarding their role as fathers, but also the very specific barriers that they might be facing. So often parenting programs might be organized at times and places and venues that usually men cannot attend. Something as practical and logistical as that can become a barrier. And then really, again, designing content, methodologies, and programs that are engaging and appeal to them, modalities that reach men wherever they work, live, if in-person sessions are not feasible. And also important to frame the programs, not only addressing to these aspirations that through formative research we should learn about, but in ways that really make them see what's in it for them, right? This is not just a program for female caregivers, and also that they benefit from more equitable, caring, non-violent, close and warm relationship with their children, their partners, their families. So these are some of the things we've learned and how we try to, it's not a quick fix, a recipe. It does require tailoring in every context, but some of those lessons are in the brief I shared, and another one I'm going to paste there on core elements of effective fatherhood programs. So happy to continue more offline, and over to whoever would like to add.
Yeah, I'll have to sadly end the session before answering that question, but there are very many questions coming through. This shows a lot of interest. We are just starting the conversation. You're going to be hearing more, and we know we'll be hearing more from you, and we'll be engaging in other platforms, trying to answer these questions. Just in the interest of time, I want to end our session here. Encourage you to click the link, go read. Some of your answers are there in the briefs. And I would like to say a huge thank you to the three organizations that made this happen: UNICEF, Equimundo, Prevention Collaborative, particularly the comms team that was behind the work and just really preparing us for this webinar and making it successful. I would like to thank everyone who's participated here today. You've been active, you've shown interest, you've given us the motivation that this work is truly needed and that we will continue participating and talking to each other. Click that link. The briefs are up and people are asking whether they can continue sharing them. Yes, you can share them and reach out to us in case you have any other questions. They are all up in the UNICEF site, Prevention Collaborative and Equimundo. Thank you and see you in the next webinar.